Hey everybody, it's Dr. Glenn Krieger, and you are listening to the inaugural episode of the Orthopreneurs Podcast. I want to thank everybody out there who's listening to this because there have been pioneers in this field who have already sort of shown me the way a bit. Of course, Lance Miller with the Elevate Orthodontic podcast is amazing, and I advise you to go listen to it if you're not. Of course, the amazing Kyle Fagala with the Digital Orthodontist, streaming live, and ultimately that's video. He's doing a great job with that. And I've spoken to both of these gentlemen about the fact that, I think there's a lot more room in this space for us to have different places that we can talk about these sorts of things. And the goal of this podcast is a little bit different than I think what's going on out there. Is I want to bring in people who are not necessarily orthodontists, not necessarily even in the dental field, people in business, leadership, management, everyday people outside of our field to help give us some insight in terms of how we can run our practices better, how we can perhaps interface with our teams better. And of course, before we get started with this first one, I want to say thank you to everybody who's a part of the Orthopreneurs world. It's hard to believe that it's been around for less than 2 years, and we're approaching 4,000 people, and hopefully you're getting something out of it. Of course, a huge thanks goes to my wife, who puts up with me and allows me to type on the computer at 1 a.m. Or at 5:30 in the morning. And the last person I want to say thank you to is the person who's sitting here with me today, my business partner, Doug Shaw, Dr. Douglas Shaw. So thank you for being here, Doug.
Thank you for having me, Dr. Krieger.
Oh, stop it. So for those of you out there, Doug is not famous yet. He's got arguably the best set of hands in practice that I've ever seen in 26 years in practice. But anybody who's ever met us, right, has the first thing they ask after they sort of find out about our life is what?
So, how are you guys partners? Nobody quite understands our relationship and how we go about our business dealings together. So
yeah, it's really confusing to people because I think the standard model of partnership typically revolves around the fact that you end up with somebody who has either one practice and an associate comes in and starts working with them and they acquire an ownership part of the practice. And then over time, there's a senior partner, junior partner, and then equal partnership. And then the senior partner tends to sell off or reduce time. And there's two people in one practice, or they kind of share two practices or something along that lines. But when people sort of hear our story, they don't quite understand how we're partners. And I think the first thing to get into is that, because I think there's a lot of lessons to be learned about our partnership. So, Doug, why don't you tell people out there how many practices we have together?
That's a good question. That's always evolving. But right now we actually have 3 practices together.
How many do we work together?
That's a 0, a big goose egg. We don't actually work in the same practice together. So 2 of the locations that we have, I operate, and the other Dr. Krieger operates.
And we never, ever, I don't know if patients could handle us working together in the same practice.
I don't know how well that would work.
Yeah,
out.
Well, it would be great.
We wouldn't get anything done. That's the problem.
We'd never get anything done, but it would be a blast. But I work my practice, which is owned by both of us, 50-50, and you work the other 2 practices, which are owned by us 50-50. And the plan is for neither one of us to ever work in the other person's practice, but not because we don't want to. It's just the way it's working out, right?
We're like the plastic of orthodontics. We're coming to disrupt the partnership world.
Don't listen to him. We don't want to disrupt the partnership world. But the truth of the matter is that for most people out there, how many times have we been asked this question? Can you explain your partnership? I don't get it, right?
I think there's a little, I don't know if it's FOMO or just people are just intrigued by our relationship because, I'm not out there as the face of this group or lecturing out like you, Dr. Krieger. And so people,
Dr. Krieger, wow.
Dr. Krieger, I got to keep it official.
That's my dad.
When they hear about our partnership and that we don't work in the same practice and they see us on Facebook or they follow us and it's Krieger Orthodontics and it's Shaw Orthodontics and it really confuses them. And so
with totally different websites.
Totally different websites, totally different logo.
all the things that people talk about economy of scale, we've sort of thrown out the window.
Right.
And quite frankly, at least on my end, I don't even feel any regret about that. I think it's, at least so far,
I think it's actually allowed us to do more as a partnership. I think you hear about a lot of partnerships, and some of the biggest struggles that partnerships face is not being on the same page as far as what's going on within the practice or the marketing. For me, it's like, imagine practicing with your best friend, but not having to be in the same office, but being able to share that.
I'm your best friend.
Yes, Dr. Krieger. Yes, Dr. Krieger.
Still won't call me by my first name.
All right, Glenn. All right, we'll go first name basis here. So,
yes, Dr. Shaw.
See, this is why we would never get anything done if we practiced together.
Nothing would ever happen.
But yeah, it's like practicing with your best friend and being able to share the ideas and the challenges that we face. We talk every morning on the way to work, and usually every evening on the way home from work, we're talking about what's going on with the days and the struggles we're having with staff. And there are economies of scales that we capitalize on for sure. When it came to the initial branding, the way that our practices came about, kind of put us down the path of having two different names, different logos.
Right. And I don't know if you want to touch on that a little bit about the fact that when we started together, and we'll get to that story in just a second. We will get to that in a second. Let me just jump back into something you said about partnerships, because my father, who is a dentist, retired now, GP, he had two partnerships that crashed and burned. And the statistics would bear out that the overwhelming majority of our orthodontic peers are practicing by themselves. At least that's changing now, but historically that's the way it's always been. And my father had two partnerships that just destroyed, almost lost our house over the first breakup. Second breakup almost caused him to have to work an extra 20 years, but thankfully it worked itself out. And for me growing up, watching those two partnerships fall apart, my mother having to go back to work full time when I was about 10 years old, going back to law school, it was an ugly situation for us watching that. And so, for the folks out there who are listening to this right now, it took a huge leap of faith for me to be able to join into a partnership. That's 50-50. It's a marriage, essentially. Everything is shared. And so as this evolves a little bit and you get to learn a little bit more about Doug and myself and our relationship, hopefully it'll make more sense. But I think one has to be very careful before I don't think partnerships are for everybody. I don't know if you agree with that.
I agree 100%. That's why some marriages don't work out.
Yeah, I wish I could put my finger on why. We've seen some partnerships that haven't worked out, but I think the hardest part for people to understand is that we kind of accidentally, I realized, modeled our partnership after two oral surgeons we know here in Dallas who have the exact same partnership but are very successful, right? They each work their own place, right?
They had the same name. That's the only difference.
Yeah. Well, their names are a little different, but at the end of the day, what are the benefits of us practicing in your eyes? What are the benefits of us practicing in separate practices, but having a partnership? And would it be any different? Could we share those things not being partners, right? So maybe somebody out there is listening and going, hey, I've got a friend who practices 5 miles from me. I don't want to be 50-50 partners with them, but can I share some of this economy of scale, right? So I guess the first question is, what do we benefit from being partners, and what could we do, if we weren't partners?
That's a good question. I think there's a lot of synergy when it comes to a partnership. You can only lift so much on your own, and everybody's strengths are different. So I do think that the audience needs to hear kind of the evolution of our story.
Go for it. Yeah, please.
As to kind of Glenn's background. Most of you may know Glenn's background. He was high-end general dentist, doing full mouth rehabs for about 20 years before he decided to have a midlife crisis and cash it all in to go back to ortho residency. Some people buy a car, he goes back to school.
Yeah.
So,
and the reasoning behind that is also very confusing to people, but that's another story for another time.
But thankfully for me, he did that. I grew up in Salt Lake area in Utah, and at the time there was no dental schools there. I didn't have a dentist in my family. I didn't have a father who was a dentist. I had a great general dentist growing up who was in my neighborhood, and I really looked up to him and enjoyed the profession and loved my own experience through orthodontics, and got me inspired to go that route. And so I went to SUNY Buffalo for dental school.
I went to SUNY Buffalo for dental school.
You did just a few years before.
Yeah.
And I knew I wanted to. I was always kind of on the path for orthodontics. That's what I wanted to do. So I worked hard in dental school. Was able to do well enough to be blessed with a number of interviews, and one of those interviews happened to be at Nova Southeastern University at the exact same time that Glenn was on the interview trail, and that is actually where we first met. We interviewed together down at Nova Southeastern.
I think after that, I had a rental car, and I think I drove you and Chris Trockle.
You did.
Right? You were staying with Chris Trockle,
Yep.
Also amazing Buffalo guy.
Yep.
And Doug's very humble. He did better than just okay.
Well, it led me to everything we do in life leads us to certain paths that, there may or may not be somebody else looking overhead, kind of guiding us in that direction. But, I met Dr. Krieger the day of our interview. And,
I'm going to find you. Every time you call me Dr. Krieger, I'm going to have a fine jar.
And fortunately, we matched down at that program together. It's funny. He said I went to Buffalo too. When we first met with all of the postgraduate programs together in a big lecture hall, they had everybody kind of go around and introduce themselves. And
about 50 of us, right?
Yeah, I was sitting next to Glenn, and they wanted us to tell where we were from, where we did dental school, what year we graduated.
And we were hiding in the very back row.
And we were. It was auditorium stating, and we were up in the nosebleeds.
Front row was like all the international students, and then it moved up to pedo, endo, and all that stuff.
And we were up in the back. And so it got to me, and I stood up and I said, Doug Shaw, SUNY Buffalo, 2012. And then Glenn stood up and said, Glenn Krieger, SUNY Buffalo, 1992. And the whole room.
You could hear it.
It was.
It was like a whip crack.
Everybody's heads just turned to look up to see who the old guy in the room was.
Who's this moron who went back to school? We have to see this 80-year-old man. That was funny.
So anyway, I hit it off early with Dr. Krieger, with Dr. Glenn.
Now I'm a pediatric dentist.
Dr. Glenn.
And I think it's important to interject here also the fact that we have very common moral ground, right? Florida, especially South Florida, can be a bit of a playground, if you will. I saw a lot of partying like rock stars down there. Not that there's anything wrong with it, but you already had how many kids at that point when you started?
So when I moved to Florida, I had two young kids, almost 3 and just turned 5 when we moved down there.
Yeah, and I had 3 kids, but mine were a little bit older. I think mine were somewhere in the range of about 14, 10 and 10, my twins.
Yeah.
And again, it's important to make a point here about Doug, that the reason why I'm speaking to him today is because he really is representative of such a large proportion of our specialty out there. Of the people who are listening right now are, mid-30s, student debt, kids, maybe not kids, but, just classic example of somebody who's a millennial who's making his way through the orthodontic world. And so the thing I think that's worth mentioning right now, as we talk about kids and what we had in common, is that we didn't just go to school together, but we had very common ground. And I think that's part of what makes our relationship work so well.
Yeah.
And the fact that he's Mormon, I'm a Jew. We always joke about
Mormon and a Jew walk into a bar.
Yeah, it always sounds like a bad joke starting. But the truth is, we have so much in common because of our faith-based lives. And I personally, I didn't even know who you really were the night of the interview. But like the second day of Tweed wire bending,
we were convinced we were going to practice Tweed together.
Yeah. Day one, you remember? Day one was, this is awesome, dude. this is like the coolest.
We should do this.
We should totally start
awesome.
a practice, and it'll be tweed, and we'll bend this wire, and then
J-hook headgear.
Oh, it was awesome. And then day 2 was like, this is kind of tough, man. I don't quite understand these aesthetic bend things.
I think we'll get this. We'll get it. We'll get
day
it.
Day 3 was like, I don't know. And then by Friday, I remember we were walking to the parking lot together, like, there's no freaking way we're doing this.
No.
And,
anything but this.
Yeah. But ultimately, you and I sort of, without saying it, we kind of assumed that we were going to work together at some point, even though we had no idea where we were. Every day, we'd each pack a lunch, and we'd sit in the closet, they called it, at the clinic, and we would just sit and
talk
and figure out ways to annoy our
co-residents.
No, not the co-residents, the faculty more than anything. It was really kind of, because diagnostic conference always followed. So it was our goal to figure out what literature could we learn, some obscure literature that we could cite that nobody in the diagnostic conference had ever heard of, so they couldn't fight us on it, right? So
yeah,
Walker on Kowalski, I'll never forget that.
Ruffled a few feathers that way.
So we'd spend the time doing these things, and ultimately our career paths went completely different directions, right? Originally, your plan, like, we sort of stepped away a little bit and assumed we weren't going to work together, and then you ended up having a pretty sweet deal waiting for you in Oklahoma, right?
Yeah, I was actually looking to go with Dr. Chris Strockel and into that practice for a little while, and
sorry, Chris.
And that's what, and that's where that was headed. I know Glenn had a dream associate to partner position waiting for you in South Florida.
About a year into residency, I was offered, with a year and a half left. I had. It's hard to. You always say this about yourself, but you knew the practice. It was.
Yeah.
By all means, a golden opportunity. But, South Florida wasn't necessarily for me and my wife. We needed a little slower pace of life. And lifestyle has always been more important than the practice itself. And so,
we were still going to make it work in South Florida. I took the ADEX while I was in ortho residency so that I could get my license there. I'd taken the REB during dental school and figured there's no better opportunity if I was ever going to need that license to do that while I was in South Florida.
But so I think the common point to make here is that when it came to partnership, it wasn't, they always say, you should marry your best friend, right? If you marry your best friend, the marriage is in better shape. And I think it's important to make a note here is that we never ever decided to partner because of money, right? We never decided to partner because of potential growth opportunities or market saturation opportunities or things like that. We just decided to partner because we had become best friends and wanted to spend time together. And more importantly, I think the foundation of trust is that, I say this all the time, if something happened to me or my wife, I would trust you with my kids. If a life and death decision needed to be made, I would trust you 100% with it.
Oh, I fooled you.
Yeah, you can wait to pull the plug, aren't you?
Yeah, no, I agree 100%. I think, it's never been about that. I guess mainly because we've never had money together. That's never been an issue.
We're the richest broke guys. So we always joke about that because we've been practiced now. We're coming up on 4 years since graduation, and things thankfully are doing great.
Yep.
But you learn a lot about your partner when there's no money.
Yeah.
You learn a lot about, and so again, I'm going back to the point that you just don't call somebody and say, hey, let's go partner.
No,
right?
we dated for 30 months before ever committing to each other. So
that's true.
I think,
although now we're going to get made fun of the rest of our life because you said that we dated. Thanks, Doug.
Well, you keep talking about this partnership, marriage, whatever.
This is Texas.
But yeah, we got to spend a lot of hours together, getting to know each other and morals and values. And I mean, we'd spend lunch not only talking about how we could, ruffle the feathers of our faculty, but I always looked to Glenn as a mentor. I mean, he had a lot of life experience. He blazed the trail before in the dental industry, and so I would sit and pick his brain about business, about dentistry, about everything that he'd been through. And so I felt pretty fortunate that I had that opportunity and that resource and that mentor available to me.
And the other way around, though, for me, it was like, I think I get things after a while, but I'm definitely not the quickest learner in the classroom. I work really hard, right? And my mantra's always been outwork, right? I may not get it quick as everybody, but I'll get there. And Doug just seemed to get things really quickly. And so part of it for me was like, we'd sit there and he'd talk to me about business, but I'd also be asking questions about, you know, how he did that thing clinically, or a new technique that he's trying to use, or something else in clinic. And so these lunches were great. And I think it was sort of a dress rehearsal, if you will, for partnership. And again, I can't underscore that enough, is that, you know, I don't know if you can ever really select a partner. I think it sort of kind of happens.
I mean, I think our relationship, our business partnership, you're not just going to select somebody that way.
Yeah.
I think there has to be some history and some background,
But here's a question going back now. Let's bring it back on topic. What do we gain now out of our partnership by not working together? What with us not working together, what do we gain in a partnership? Because I think that's the most confusing thing to people.
So you might think we lose all of our economies of scale, but that is not the case. I mean, we are always talking marketing strategies. We are always talking business growth.
But we could do that if we weren't partners.
You could, and I think that's what, you know, the great thing about Facebook groups and the great thing about podcasts and all these virtual resources that are available to us, that we can share back and forth, and you can gain that stuff. But you know, you can't do what we're doing as a single doctor. You can't have the 3 practices that we're going to have, and it extends beyond that. I mean, Glenn runs this Orthopreneurs group. He spends, you know, probably at least 80 hours a week outside of his practice. I don't know how you calculate it up, but working on this kind of stuff to bring to the masses. And so it allows him the freedom to do that while still being able to be a part of a growing, I guess you call us a group practice, even though we don't practice together. Yeah. We have coverage for each other.
Yeah. Materials, market. And we do some shared marketing. Yeah. Right? There are some things that we can share. When we do a new welcome packet kind of thing to potential new patients, you know, we can come up with the same idea. If we were going to market to GPs, which I got to go on record and say, we can disagree. Doug and I don't agree on everything. And our partnership thrives in spite of that, because of it. Mm-hmm. I think. And for instance,
things I do differently still than you're doing.
I've stopped with GPs. I'm done. I was a GP for 20 years. I thought I understood their brains. Today's GP is a different kind of animal. And in my neck of the woods, very few refer. They have in-house. All the pedos near me have in-house ortho. Near Doug, it's a different situation. So Doug goes out and he does a lot of work with the local GPs. I don't really do a whole lot of it. But when we do have something that we market together, we have the opportunity to send something to a graphic artist, and all they do is interchange the logo, right? So there's some benefits there, for sure. I love having another set of eyes and ears when it comes to team members, and the ability to talk over, you know, what am I going to do with this team member? How should I handle this? And I think a friend who's not a part of your practice might just get tired of hearing that after a while, right?
Yeah, and it's more resources too for our teams. I mean, we've tried to open the channels between offices, and that's always an continued battle to have our teams communicating. We use Slack as our inter-office and intra-office communication,
and we also use headsets. At least I do.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I'm saying between your office, my office, right. And we tried the headsets, and they thought that was a great idea, and has not been such a great idea.
In our office, it's worked out well. And there's an example where we do things a little differently, but we might try things at different times and work them out. But yeah, we use Slack to communicate our 2 teams together. And as far as they're concerned, everybody is employed by Drs. Shaw and Krieger. Mm-hmm. You know, everybody in my office knows that if Dr. Shaw says, hey, this is how we're going to do it, you know, it's not look at Dr. Krieger and see what he thinks. You know, they know that there's been a coordinated effort. And although it might sound like it gets a little bit confusing, I don't think it does, because we both kind of run our domains and only bring the other person in when the team is kind of expecting it. Does that make sense? Yeah?
Yeah. I mean, we're all on tops. We're on the same tops. I mean, we're not having to buy, you know, new software for every office. We're gaining economies of scale there.
IT. Yeah, for sure.
All that kind of stuff.
And you even, the opportunity to sometimes, if need be, have team members cross over from one practice to another if we needed to.
Yeah.
So I think there's definitely that benefit there.
So we do, for the most part, try to stay on the same systems and policies. And as a growing practice, those are always evolving. A staff job description, videos. It's always evolving. It's always changing in a growing practice. But we share those. We try to stay on the same page and how we run our new patient flow and things like that, so that we can interchange and have staff members going back and forth.
And before we segue into the next section, I just want to sort of explain to people here that the real reason our partnership works, and I would recommend this to everybody out there, is because my strengths and my weaknesses we share common strengths, I think, in a few things, but my weaknesses and my skill sets are a little bit different than Doug's. And whenever we do personality testing, I always test out as sort of the evangelical. I'm the guy who's standing in front of the group in the jungle with a machete saying, we can do this. Come on, guys, let's go chopping. And, we're going to find that lost city of gold and get everybody to follow and go and get there, right? Because if you don't get there, nobody's going to follow you the second time. But I'm only able to do it because I've got Doug, whose skill set is really the organizational side and really worrying about the details, so that while I'm blazing a trail in front, he's making sure that everybody's walking through the jungle safely, not getting, eaten by a snake or getting cut on the cuttings that I've just laid on the floor, right? Would you agree with that?
I would agree with that.
Yeah.
You're definitely more of a trailblazer, and you don't have a hesitation of just jumping on something, pulling the trigger and going. I'll be a little more cautious. And again, I think part of that comes down to life experience too, and the path that you have been on, and the experience that you have had, and my lack of experience and being on the other side or seeing the other side. But I think that's where we do feed off of each other and make this work.
And I think we've both changed a bit, right? I've definitely become less aggressive, and you've definitely gotten less conservative.
Right.
And it's kind of interesting to watch us kind of move to the middle a little bit in this partnership over time, because, I think my weaknesses have sort of gotten better because of you. But the nice thing is being able to just turn a project over to you, or you turn one over to me. And again, that's where I think as partners, you get that, whereas friends, you're not going to, I can't say to a friend, hey, by the way, you go do 20 videos on the new patient experience and how we should be doing that, so that we can upload them to our G Suite. And that way everybody from both teams can share it. And I'll do the ones on the finances and pro forma or accounting or day sheets and all that. I think if you're using different systems, which we're not, if you have totally different policies, which we do not have, it makes it very tough to do that with somebody who's not 100% vested with you.
Yeah.
And so,
yeah, definitely. I think when it comes to just the marketing, I think that's a great thing about these online groups too, is
I agree.
We don't have to reinvent the wheel, but more of these intricate practice details and growth. You've got these projects going on, I've got these projects going on, but it's all for the better of both of us. I'm out trying to refi some loans or find a practice, find a new practice,
which I hate doing,
to acquire, and I got that. I'm going to take care of that. And I know that you're going to take care of the tasks that are on your plate, and together it's for the both of us. We're getting it both done. So.
And it works because we both know we're killing ourselves to do our respective jobs. And I think that if you were working halfway towards the loans and it was 3 months and where is it going, or if you were saying, hey, Glenn, where are these new patients you told me we're going to get from this marketing concept, and I haven't spoken to the guy yet, right? I don't think that would work. But I think the two of us are committed to the end goal, and that's why it kind of works. So I just want to switch gears for a moment here, because as I mentioned, you are John Q. orthodontist, right? 35-ish in age, few kids, one more on the way in another 60 days or so. Mm-hmm. And so let's ask the question that a lot of people out there, have to struggle with on a daily basis. Not so much me, because I got one in college and 2 high school kids. What's it like for you? How do you balance this family practice thing? I look at you every day and I wonder, here's a guy building 2 practices, driving pretty darn hard, student debt, 1 kid on the way soon, 3 kids already at home with an amazing wife. Rachel's amazing. So how do you do it? I mean, what's the secret to people out there who may not have gotten there yet?
So, I mean, you hit the nail on the head on the nail. Oh,
Nail on the head.
That it takes a great partner, a wife, who can pick up the slack at home. It is a challenge, and for me, finding work-life balance is very difficult. And I have young kids who are very demanding of my time when I'm around.
And you are really, for those out there, he's a really, really involved father. And I always tell him, he makes me feel like the worst dad on earth, but he's such a great dad. And that's the part I'm trying to distill out of this, is that you are not just all about business. You are a dad who's there for the flag football and, going to church on every Sunday, and you're there with your kids after work. And, if you're on the phone with him at 5:45, 6 o'clock when he walks through the door to his house, you can hear the pandemonium hit, right? We've all been there.
True.
So you're an involved dad.
Yeah.
But I just mentioned a minute ago, you're killing it with the practice. How do you do that? Where does that time come, to do this? How do you do it at all ends? That's the part I don't understand. When do you get the time?
You make the time. I know right now that I'm investing in my future, our future, my family's future. And so there's sacrifices that have to be made. I mean, I think the biggest struggle in life is finding that work, family, God balance. And you have to make the time. I mean, I have to be on a structured schedule. I have to get myself up at 5:15 in the morning, get my workout in. Otherwise that doesn't happen. But that helps me kind of get my day going. I get the kids out of bed, get them going on their way. Right now, my wife is 8 months pregnant. And so, I have to pick up more slack around the house. And so I just know that I'm investing in my future and I'm putting in the time. I'm making it happen. There's certain things that you miss out on. You try to do what you can and know that it's for the better of the future.
I think that's something that we have in common in terms of our spouses, right? Alyssa, my wife, has always understood that, the practice doesn't come first, but the practice, if nurtured like a baby, will grow and mature. And there comes a time where maybe you can sort of let it do its own thing like a child, right? It grows into itself if you've given it good lessons, if you've taught your child properly, you sort of set them free a little bit. I don't think you can ever stop working on your practice, but my wife understood that there's, when you're 44 years old and you go back to ortho residency and you don't get out till you're 47 and you take out student loans like many of the people listening right now, better be a very understanding wife. And when I tell the story one day, a lot of it comes from her is the reason why I ended up going back to ortho. But again, it sounds to me like you're saying basically, look, I would love to be asleep at 10 o'clock at night. I would love to be watching TV at 10 o'clock at night, but I've taken care of the kids. I've taken care of my wife. I've made sure the house is good. And now it's time. I got to go back to work on my practice.
Yeah. You have to find the time when you can. I mean, I'll sit down and my wife will put on a Netflix show and I'll sit next to her on the couch. I'll open up my computer and I'll be doing work. I'll be sending out all those emails that I was supposed to be taking care of, trying to get this, project done here, that project done there. And, we're to the point in practice where we're busy enough during the day. We don't have that downtime, or I'm doing clin checks, or you just have to make the time.
And how long's your commute to work each day?
One office, if I get caught in the rush hour traffic, can take about an hour and a half to get there. The other office is about a 40-minute commute in the morning.
Yeah, there's no time in your day.
No, I actually I did. They've got to put a gym in right next to our newest location, so I joined that gym. So I actually wake up even earlier to beat the rush hour, and then I'll go to the gym and work out, and then go over to the office and try to get things done before the rush of the day happens.
But hey, the other day at the gym.
Oh yeah, that was pretty cool. So there's a gym here, and I don't know how corporate or how many states it's in, but Fitness Connection is the gym that just went into next to one of the offices, and they do I was going to say patient appreciation, but I guess it's member appreciation day, where they actually allow vendors to come in twice a month and set up a little booth And so actually they had their first one this last week, and we went and set up a booth. I took the iTero over, and I think we scheduled 7 exams and scanned 2-3 people while we were there. And
what kind of incentive did you give them to do it that day?
we gave them $500 off Invisalign.
It's amazing. It's amazing. And all of this happened because you woke up early to go to the gym.
Yeah.
And spent the $10 a month to go to the gym next door.
$10 a month, Fitness Connection.
But going back just real quickly to the story about your wife, did she really understand going into this what life was going to be like right now? And how would you tell somebody, it's I don't think my wife kind of knew, but I'm curious to know if your wife knew, and what would you be doing right now if she wasn't as understanding as she is?
Definitely wouldn't be doing what I'm doing. I felt like I didn't even realize what it was going to be like. But I always tried to prep her on that, and she understood that, and she wants what I want. We have the same vision as far as where we want to be in our professional life, and the quality of life we want to have. And so she knows that she has to support me in helping us get there. If you don't have a supportive spouse, wife, partner, it wouldn't work. It just wouldn't. There's no way around it. I mean, they have to understand that they've got to pick up the slack where you can't, because you've got to put the time in to get where you want to be.
Well, she saw you put the time in dental school, right? To get to where you got to in your class, in terms of rank, there was no way you were going to get there without putting the time in. And I'm sure she saw you do that. And, you had the similar, you guys had to talk, obviously, about your goals and visions and where you planned on being. And one day, you will be financially solvent.
Yeah.
Yeah, but
one day.
So a couple of other quick questions for you, just to help people out there a little bit. And again, my goal with chatting with Doug as this first episode is really just, like I said, I think there's insight in terms of both of our lives that comes across here. And number 2, the goal of this whole podcast is really not just, like I said, to get the most successful practices, but to get people who are just like a lot of the people out there listening. And we're fortunate in orthodontics. It was a big paradigm shift for me to go from general dentistry, where I was trying to get to the top of the heap. I wanted to be number 1. I wanted to be the best in restorative dentistry, and I did everything I could to try to learn everything. But if I looked around my peer groups, they were good people, they were smart, but you come into orthodontics and everybody's brilliant, right? I know we'd argue about jokes about this one may not or that, but for the most part, you're in a room with pretty smart people all the time. And, you are the average, in many respects, orthodontist, right? You come out of school with moderate to significant debt.
Moderate to
significant, and 35 years old, 4 years in practice, your own practice, and I wanted people to hear your story. So let me ask you a couple of good questions. If you could go back in time to before you went to school, before dental school started, what's the one thing you wish you knew about orthodontics before you went to dental school that you now know? What's the one thing you wish somebody had said to you? Hey, Doug, by the way, before you start this journey, you should know X.
I didn't realize the amount of business and marketing, the entrepreneurial side of being an orthodontist required, honestly. I mean, you don't see that. When you grow up and you look at your orthodontist and you just see a nice family man who does well for himself and is always happy and makes people smile, but you don't see the back end of things and what it takes to get there. And so it's been a real eye-opener. And I don't think it always was that way. I mean, I think there was a time where you might have been able to hang a shingle and make it happen. And
my dad talks about that all the time. My dad got out of dental school in '64, and he always said that, he said, number 1, you could literally take a map and throw a dart at it and open a practice there. You'd be fully funded by some dental manufacturer, and you'd be in the black, which means making a profit in your second month, there was no dental school debt at that point.
Yeah. Well, and that's the other thing too, is I don't think you realized opening an orthodontic practice from scratch, really how long it takes to be solvent.
Yeah.
To be able to, you can produce a lot that first year, and not see a fraction of it.
Produce.
I didn't say
Collect.
revenue. I didn't say collect. Produce.
But so now 4 years later, right? The first practice we got together, we started from scratch. And I think I just want to touch on this real fast because it's like another little pocket here because people won't really understand this. When we started practicing together, we had a third partner at the time and it just didn't work out for not personal reasons. The
plan didn't work out.
The plan just didn't work.
The practice we were supposed to acquire, it didn't happen.
Yeah, exactly. Well said. And so, but I worked the practice that we purchased, the startup, essentially.
Yeah, we bought a shell that had been built out.
Yeah, so I worked that, and I worked corporate 2 days a week. You worked corporate 5 days a week.
Yes.
And essentially all the money went into a pot. Now, this is the part I think that blows people's mind, is that post-tax dollars, money after your taxes have been taken out, you put into the middle of the pot, so to speak, to help fund the growing of a new startup so that I could pay my bills to augment what I was making at corporate, right?
Yep.
So when people talk about partnership, right, they're like, oh, it'd be great to have a partner. But how many people are willing to take money out of their own pocket, literally out of their bank account, and throw it into somebody else's bank account so that way, they're paying into their future? Talk about a spouse being on board with that one.
Yeah, I try not to talk to my spouse about that.
But I wanted to make that clear because that's a big deal. Like there aren't many partnerships that work like that.
I was looking at the future. I was investing in my future because I knew that next move, and we came out and we looked for practices for sale. There was nothing. There is nothing. Like when an ortho practice goes up for sale, it's already had a buyer. It's already had an associate that was coming in, or there was some kind of. So by the time it hits the broker, it's either a garbage practice or, just nothing there. So, I was investing in the future because I knew if we were going to end up opening another practice that I would then start up. By that time, I would have hoped, this other practice had been going well enough that we could then augment my income.
Right.
By going into another startup.
And that's what essentially we did. So in February of 2015, we bought this practice, started it. In March of 16, we did the second practice.
Yep.
And then essentially got ourselves out. I was working Sundays at corporate to augment. We were doing everything we could. And then essentially both of us got out of the corporate world and bought a third practice. One went for sale. That's the hour-and-a-half drive.
Yep.
And so now, touching on your statement about, you didn't realize how difficult startups would be, right? If I asked you this 3 years ago, I know the answer. But now we're in our fourth year almost of the first practice. Which do you prefer, startup or buy an existing? And be honest.
Well, now we're closer to the sore spot of the acquisition.
But you bought an active practice while it was a small practice. You did buy a practice.
Yeah.
And
it's tough because there's pros and cons with both of them. I would much rather be able to set up a practice from scratch. However, the cash flow of an existing practice lightens the burden significantly.
You haven't answered the question.
I think we did the best of both. I think we've done them both. So
I agree.
If you can do it both,
a hybrid. If you can do a hybrid model, but imagine if you buy that $2 million practice. That's killing it. It's got cash coming in and accounts receivable of $1.5 million or $2 million.
No question.
Your bank note every month will be $15,000, $20,000, whatever it is.
Take the headaches with that one.
Yeah, you would.
Yeah.
Right, exactly. It's that smaller practice that's not maybe cash flowing that's the problem.
Yeah.
That makes it more difficult.
Yeah, it's definitely, it takes a while, and it takes a lot of grind and a lot of time and a lot of ortho to have that engine finally chugging along.
Yeah, everybody talks about 5 years. When Chris Trockle, I know we keep mentioning Chris, he's a good friend of both of us, practices in Oklahoma with his brother Marty, two really, really talented orthodontists. And so they're Oklahoma, we're Texas, we get to see each other a lot. We all went to residency together. He talked when he was visiting last time about 5 years being that magic number. And we always heard that in residency. And it's kind of really crazy how now that we're getting it 4 years, you can really see how that economy of scale again, that the momentum you've developed sort of builds. And for those of you out there who may be in your first or second year of a startup, don't fret, work hard. And it really does, right? Would you agree with that?
Yeah, it really does. And it's fun to watch it grow. It's fun to see that. I mean, as long as your production numbers are significantly higher than the collections that are coming in, you're growing.
Yeah.
I mean, it's as simple as that. And as long as you're collecting.
It's really important to make sure that your partner's numbers are not as good as yours.
All right, so we have some friendly competition. I see his numbers, he sees mine.
Right.
I'm chasing his tail because the practice he's in is a year ahead.
That's not the reason
of my startup, and I'm determined.
He is
that I'm gonna pass him up here.
It's kind of fun, and I think there's a benefit there of having two practices. Is that we're always working together. But we said this not too long ago to our financial planners. We by nature in orthodontics are pretty competitive people, and even when we're working on the same team, even if my practice is killing it, there's that bit of a competition that. It just irks me when he has a month that's better than me, even though it's in our best interest. Yes. Like it's the dumbest thing on earth, but it kills him. It kills him if I've got a better month than him. And you need to understand that our practice demographics are remarkably different because I work in an area.
3 locations, really.
Doug works right next door to a pediatric dentist who refers a ton of new patients to him. And in my area, I barely get any GP or pedo referrals. So our models of how we run are very, very different. But nonetheless, the old man is still ahead by a little bit. But he could.
I'm coming.
He's coming for me. Next year, I think, is the year of Doug. I think it's the year of Doug. So tell me, son, what do you struggle with in practice? Right now, what is it that you really struggle with? What are you working on? What's your goal to get better at?
So for me right now, I'm working 5 days a week, and I'm busy with patients, and sort of to really get that extra time to get organized and implement the policies and systems rather than just letting them kind of grow organically or just happen. That's where I feel like I struggle, which I think is one of your strong suits, Glenn, and that's why we work out well, because I'll say, hey, what are you guys doing for this in your office? What's the policy? What do we want to? Let's talk this through, and actually getting written policies and systems in place and implemented, even though they're always changing. I struggle with that, and HR issues are always.
But do you struggle with it because of your inexperience, or do you struggle with it because, do you find it tough because it's just not in your nature, or is this advice to people out there to say, hey, this is not naturally who you are, and you need to learn this as a skill like you should have?
Yeah, I don't think that's naturally who I am. And I think that's something that you either need to find somebody to help you get that in place, which fortunately for me, I've got you, Glenn.
This is like a Sonny and Cher moment. I got you, Doug.
Or look for a consultant or somebody to help get those policies and systems in that organization. And when you open your door and you've got one patient day one, you're not thinking about your systems for a going practice with 4 or 5 full columns of patients. And so you don't see that far in the future. You don't see that vision, and you don't know how to set up those systems for that efficient practice.
Yeah. And I agree with you 100%. And for those folks out there who don't know my story, I was in practice for 20 years, legitimately, 1992 to 2012 as a general dentist. But I must have spent $500,000 on consultants in that time period. I did a year of business school at the University of Washington at a special program for dentists. I did a lot of stuff at the Schuster Center where I learned policies and systems, and it's not in my nature. This is not at all who I am. He's making me laugh. He's making me laugh. It's not at all in my nature to be that guy who does policies and systems, and I think you have to learn it. And I'm going to stand on my soapbox for just a second, because this is where I always say, I think it's borderline criminal that ortho residencies and dental schools allow people to come into their programs and either A, don't legitimately give them a good idea of what to expect when they get out, and that's not so much their fault. It's on us to sort of know what we're getting into, but there should be a legitimate business curriculum. And in my dream world, if I could down the road develop a real business curriculum with people who are business experts in policies and systems, accounting, pro forma, banking, law, and develop this curriculum to be able to let students in residencies really understand what is it like to, follow Gary Vaynerchuk around, follow Gary Vee for a day and see what it's like to be an entrepreneur. It really bothers me. And so that's why I asked you about that question related to, what is it that you wish you could do better?
Yeah.
And again, so do you think you were built an entrepreneur before you went into this?
Not at all.
Not that you were expecting it, but you had a lawn business.
Yeah. I mean, not to the extent that I need to. I had a lawn business. I always was selling things.
But not when you were 12.
Not when I was 12.
I didn't want to think like you had one lawnmower. You had a legitimate lawn business that you sold.
Yeah.
When you went to dental school?
Yeah. Helped me pay for most of my dental school, half of my dental school. I think that's the other thing that people don't realize. When you go into school and you're taking out government loans and you think it's play money and I just get more loans and I'm taking care of this. And, I don't really, we live frugally, but I didn't feel like we were starving. And then you come out of school.
Yeah.
And go back into repayment. And now, now I've got a house. I've got student loans. We've got this practice debt on a build out that, we did a nice finish out on. And so how are you going to pay for that? I mean, that's stressful.
Yeah.
I think that's part of the drive to get to where I want to be.
Yeah, I mean, you're always looking over your shoulder.
I'm always looking over my shoulder.
And it's funny because
to keep going.
So for people out there, it's kind of funny. Doug and I, there was a period of time because, I'd lived a good life for a while, man. I mean, I had a great life before I went back to ortho, and ultimately medical situations in my family.
So he's saying going back to ortho, made his life miserable and horrible.
No, it didn't. It's a little miserable.
I had a good life before.
I had such a great life before traveling the world. It was a great life, but there were medical situations in my family that caused me to have to leave Seattle, which is where my practice was. And I loved what I was doing. And because there were family medical issues that forced me to have to sell my practice and get out of Seattle, that's when I turned to my wife and said, hey, if I'm going to start over again, I want to be an orthodontist, because I always felt like when I was doing full mouth reconstructions, it was, I'm prepping 28 teeth. I'd much rather remove them into the right position than to cut all of them down. And the opportunity was there when I had to sell my practice. So I had a great life, but I remember there was a period of time where I really tried to spend nothing. Like it lasted like 2 weeks in residency, where I tried to spend nothing. And we would text each other how little we spent on dinner that night for our families. And I remember, I lost by $1 because I keep kosher and he doesn't. And I think you made dinner for your family for like $1.42.
Something like that.
It was like a package or two of like Walmart. No, it was like dollar store mac and cheese.
Yeah.
With hot dogs.
Put some hot dogs in it.
Hot dogs. And I still remember
mac and cheese and hot dogs. If you haven't tried it, that's a staple in our home still, actually.
Well, and learning that like at Chili's you get bottomless fries.
It wasn't at
Red
Chili's.
Robin.
Red Robin. Bottomless fries at Red Robin.
Yeah. IKEA Tuesday night meatballs.
Kids eat free at IKEA.
I learned all those lessons from you. But yeah, I mean, it's they don't give you an idea when you go to dental school that, you're going to take all this money out. And, we saw people spending money on pool parties, right, in Miami, and going crazy. And again, I heard somebody once say that, getting into ortho is not a lottery. We're going to make a great living, but you're going to have to pay that money back at some point.
Yep.
And so, so if you were going to go back through everything all over again, what advice would you give yourself as a pre-college student? Pre-college. And although you say you're not an entrepreneur, you had a business. You're more so than many people out there. You went to people and asked them for business. You asked them for money. You had to keep a balance going of what was happening. If you didn't make money, you couldn't stay in business. There was an entrepreneurial background there. But what would you tell yourself now if you were going to go back to pre-college? Would you have done ortho again?
It's a hard question. I tell people when they ask me about it that I would, but I would probably look for other opportunities to help fund that education, whether it's joining the military, whether it's,
Would you have worked for longer as a dentist? Because, there's a lot of orthodontists who absolutely hate general dentistry, right? And if,
I didn't. I mean, I enjoyed it. And
would you work as a GP? Would you have worked as a GP? Would you consider having worked longer as a GP or at all to make money and save the money before going back?
It's hard for me to answer that because when I set my mind on something, I kind of put my head down and go for it. And I don't know if I would have started working as a GP and got in that route, if I would have just changed directions and gone back into ortho.
Okay, that's fair.
It's hard to say. I can't answer that, but
I agree.
But I do think that's any cushion that you have financially is definitely a must. I think, unfortunately, the cost of education is what is fueling corporate dentistry and corporate orthodontics nowadays.
Yeah.
It's so outrageous that you come out of school and you have to make a living, and you can't just take that nice associate job that's not making what you need to make to pay those student loans and provide for a family. And so, it's kind of a necessary evil, this corporate dentistry thing nowadays. And that's why I see a lot of turnover, and a lot of young docs will come out and do corporate for a while and then go into practice. But
and it's interesting also because I think I may have shown you that video, an interview with a VC guy from Silicon Valley, venture capitalist, who was talking about the difference in your generation. And I mean, for people out there, we're 16 years apart, right? But we went to school at the same time. We really are different generations. Mm-hmm. And he was about 40 years old, and he was trying to explain how millennials and today's professionals see the world through a totally different set of eyes. I don't think you do quite so much, but it's that when I was a little boy, let's take it to the 1980s, early 80s before you were born. And I saw a guy pull up at a restaurant with a Lamborghini, and I go, gosh, cool car. That's awesome. That guy is so cool because he's got that cool car. When I grow up, I'm going to make money and I'm going to get that car or that house or that country club or whatever it may be, right? That was my social capital. And that's what he was talking about, is that today, it's not so much about the car or the house. It's about experiential, right? Hey, that guy, he's in Iceland. He's at Burning Man. He's at, Coachella, whatever you want to throw out there. Look how cool he is. I'm going to blow 2 weeks of my salary to go, I can go with a smaller home and a smaller car. And I don't need to be part of that country club because only old people belong to country clubs. And so, I want the boat. I want to learn to surf behind a boat so I can have cool Facebook posts and that way people see you and you're cool. And that's what he was talking about. And I definitely think that works in well with the corporate mentality today in corporate orthodontics and corporate dentistry, because in Why Size Your Business, I don't remember who wrote that book. He talks about millennials. And I think this thing you touched upon, the corporate part of it is, if it's experiential you're looking for and not homes, well, that works great because you clock out at 5 o'clock on a Friday and don't come back till Monday, and you spend 2 days in Ibiza, right? You hop on a plane at 5 o'clock. And so part of me, I know you mentioned this necessary evil. I wonder if it's a necessary part of just the progression of the social capital of a lot of people who are coming out of school right now who may never want to own their own practice. I mean, we know people who work in corporate ortho, right?
I think that's a big part of it as well. I mean, I think social media has changed people's perspective on what is successful, and that's why you're seeing that change. You can make a good living in corporate dentistry.
And no on-call?
And no on-call.
No running a business?
For me, and I worked it, there was never any professional fulfillment for me. It was just a job. I mean, I loved the ortho, and sometimes you're kind of limited in the box of what you can be doing in a corporate setting. And so it doesn't give you the clinical professional fulfillment that you might want. And also the long term. I mean, you're capped at some point.
I was the worst ever. I was the worst employee ever. I worked hard, but I just dreamed of doing my own thing.
Yeah.
And I know you're the same way. And so I'm going to have a couple of questions for you real fast, just to sort of finish, because, I'm going to show my age here. And James Lipton from Inside the Actor Studio, he has this great show. He brings in professional actors, Baldwin or, Heston or anybody he'd bring in, he would always have these great interviews. And at the end, he had 10 questions he'd ask. And I'm not going to try and reinvent the wheel because they were awesome. And I loved listening to the questions. And between us, you've never heard these 10 questions I'm about to ask you, right?
No, now you got me a little nervous.
So good. Yeah, it's going to be great. But before I get there.
No pop culture. I'm not going to know any of that.
There's no pop culture. Okay. It's all about you, One little fun fact about Doug that nobody knows is that Doug did his mission where?
In Samoa.
In Samoa. I've learned it's not Samoa, people.
It's Samoa.
And so Doug can speak Samoan fluently. So Doug, I'm a patient, and I want you to tell me that
you want me to talk dentistry in Samoa?
Yeah, I want you to
I don't think dentistry exists. Or orthodontics exists.
Are you saying there's no orthodontics in Samoa?
There is no orthodontist that I'm aware of in Samoa.
If you're an orthodontist in Samoa, I need you to prove him wrong. I need you to prove to me that you exist out there. But I want you to pretend that you're now, let's say, in a restaurant, and you want to order a meal for me and for you in Samoan. Go.
Talofa lava la fionga. Lewa fia maua maua ma wo here se me ai. Le fia ai de fa'i male pua'a. Wa'u le ke fia ai le povi.
What are we eating?
Se fasi povi ma selengi.
Nice. So if you see Doug and you see these words coming out of his mouth, it's one of the trippiest things you'll ever see. But what did we get for dinner, Doug?
So you got some banana and I ordered you some pig because I knew you wouldn't eat it, so I'm going to eat it.
Okay, thank you. Cultural deference there. I appreciate it. So you got me a banana.
Yes. I got you some Samoan bananas.
What else am I eating? All of that was
a pig, and we got some cow, some beef coming out.
Nice. So I get bananas and cow.
Yes. but I didn't know the word for kosher in Samoan. I apologize. I don't know if
there's no orthodontic word in Samoan, I promise you, the word kosher has never been spoken anywhere near Samoa. You have me crying here. I'm laughing so hard. So before we go, I'm obviously going to thank you afterwards, but here are 10 questions that used to be asked by James Lipton, who was the moderator for Inside the Actors Studio. And I just absolutely loved it. And so what I want you to do is I want you to answer these without really thinking very hard. I just want you to sort of come up with the first answer you have.
That'll be easy.
Yeah.
I don't want to think very
So here you go. You ready? It can be dirty, it can be clean, but knowing that you're a good LDS man, I know they're going to be cleanish. So you ready? So first one, what's your favorite word?
What's my favorite word? Booyah.
Love it. What is your least favorite word?
Man, I'm not supposed to think very hard.
No, but he asked these questions for 20 years. Least favorite word.
And I got to keep it clean?
Yeah, it can be Samoan if you want it.
Guy.
There you go. What does that mean?
We won't translate.
Nice. All of you in Samoa, I'm sorry for Doug. What turns you on creatively, spiritually, or emotionally?
My family.
Nice. What turns you off?
Mean people.
I can see that with you. Now, this is a tough one for you, Doug. This is a tough one. I think you already did it on number 2. What is your favorite curse word?
Crap. We can't do that.
Crap. There you go. It's good enough. I won't make you go any further than that, Doug.
All right. Thank you.
Yeah, crap. What sound or noise do you just love?
What sound or noise do I just love? You got some coins around here?
That's a good answer. I thought you were going to go with your kids' voices, but that would have been too easy. What sound or noise do you hate?
So if I said kids' voices on the first one, can I say kids' voices on the second one
works.
too?
It works.
It kind of works both ways.
Any parent out there will totally understand where you're coming from. What profession other than your own would you like to attempt?
I'm still going to play in the NFL one day.
Good for you, man. And
when I grow up.
What profession would you just not like to ever do?
I don't know, man. I never really even thought of that.
You and I have talked about pediatric dentistry.
Yeah, I don't think I could do that.
I get you.
There's a lot that I couldn't do.
I get you off the hook there. And here's the last one. If heaven exists, what would you like to hear God say when you arrive at the pearly gates?
Well done, my son.
Right on. I like it. I want to thank Doug Shaw, Dr. Doug Shaw, for being our first interviewee on the Orthopreneurs Podcast. I hope you all enjoyed this.
Thank you, Glenn.
My absolute pleasure having you, truly. I hope people got a lot out of our interaction. I don't expect every interview is going to be quite this candid and back and forth.
And this is literally candid. There was no scripting. There was no anything that went on here.
Yeah.
He told me, come over. We're going to record this. Okay.
Yeah. I hope people got a lot out of it because we get asked these questions all the time about our partnership. And again, I think you're a great example of a typical smart orthodontic resident who's entrepreneurial, who comes out and family, debt, the whole 9 yards. And I figured we don't have to just interview people who are super successful. I think you are, but
it's okay.
No, I'm sorry. No, but I mean, you're not 10 years in the practice or 8 years in the practice with, $6 million of revenue coming in under the belt and, 150 new patients a month. I think people can look at your story and relate pretty easily. And that's important.
So I hope it can help.